7 princes hung upside down from the prow of a ship, their blood dripping into the Nile, as thousands watched in absolute horror. 6 of their bodies would be displayed on the walls of Thebes for months, rotting in the Egyptian sun. The 7th? He was saved for something special, sailed 600 miles south to Nubia, where his corpse would hang as a warning to anyone who dared challenge Egyptian power. But here's the truly insane part. The man who ordered this wasn't some barbarian warlord. He was one of the most powerful rulers in human history. And what's even more disturbing is that this public execution was considered mild compared to what he did to his enemies in private. You see, this pharaoh didn't just defeat rebels, he hunted them literally, like animals. He would personally lead hunting parties into enemy territory, not for lions or elephants, but for human beings, and he kept score. Detailed records show he once captured 89,600 people in a single campaign. 89,600. That's more than the population of most ancient cities. But wait, there's an even darker detail that historians discovered recently. He would force captured rebel leaders to watch their own people being executed, one by one, before finally killing them himself, with his bare hands. Now you're probably thinking this sounds like some ancient myth or exaggeration, but here's what makes this story absolutely terrifying. We have his own personal records, carved in stone, where he brags about these acts. He was proud of them. He wanted everyone to know exactly what he was capable of. And the most disturbing part? He was only in his 20s when he perfected this system of terror. This is Amenhotep II. And his story will make you realize that some of history's most terrifying rulers aren't the ones you've heard about. Welcome to the insane true story of ancient Egypt's most brutal pharaoh. You see, Amenhotep II wasn't born a monster. He was made into one. Born around 1425 BC as the son of Thutmose III, arguably Egypt's greatest military pharaoh, young Amenhotep grew up in the shadow of a legend. But here's the crucial part. His father didn't just teach him how to rule, he taught him how to terrify. From age 5, Amenhotep was trained in what the Egyptians called the art of war. But this wasn't your typical military education. Thutmose III would take his son to watch public executions, forcing the boy to stand close enough to smell the blood and hear the dying gasps of Egypt's enemies. A pharaoh must be feared more than loved, his father would tell him. Fear lasts longer. It was an early lesson for Amenhotep that mercy was weakness, and weakness meant death in the brutal world of ancient geopolitics. But what really shaped Amenhotep's psychology was an incident when he was just 12 years old. During a minor rebellion in Nubia, his father brought him along to observe the suppression. The rebel leader's young son, roughly Amenhotep's age, was brought before them. Thutmose III handed his son a bronze dagger and gave a simple command: "Kill him." Amenhotep hesitated. The other boy was crying, begging in a language Amenhotep didn't understand. His father's voice turned cold. "Every second you hesitate, our enemies grow bolder. Kill him now, or I'll have you whipped in front of the entire court." Amenhotep would later reflect on this moment in his inscriptions, writing that as he drove the blade in, he felt something change inside him. He discovered he was good at violence. Really good. The truth is, Amenhotep had a natural advantage that made him particularly terrifying. He was physically massive for his time. Archaeological examination of his mummy reveals he stood around 5 feet 10 inches, which made him a giant in an era when the average Egyptian male was 5 feet 3 inches. He had unusually long arms and powerful shoulders, likely from his obsession with archery. Historical records show he could draw a bow that most grown men couldn't even string. He would practice for hours every day, shooting arrows through copper targets an inch thick, a feat his inscriptions claim no other man in Egypt could match. You see, Amenhotep realized early that being pharaoh meant more than just political power. It meant being a living god, and gods don't show weakness. They don't show mercy. They demonstrate absolute, overwhelming power. By age 18, He had already led 3 military campaigns as his father's general, and in each one, he personally executed enemy commanders in front of their troops. His soldiers began calling him Amenhotep the Strong-Armed. But his enemies had another name for him, the Butcher Prince. When Thutmose III died in 1425 BC, Amenhotep II ascended to the throne at approximately 25 years old, and immediately he had a massive problem. You see, the moment a new pharaoh takes power in ancient times is when empires are most vulnerable. Every vassal state, every conquered territory starts thinking the same thing. Maybe this new guy isn't as tough as his father. Maybe now's our chance for freedom. Within weeks of his coronation, intelligence reached Memphis that 7 Syrian princes were organizing a massive coalition against Egypt. These weren't minor chieftains. These were rulers of major city-states like Tunip and Kadesh, controlling vital trade routes worth millions in today's currency. But Amenhotep saw an opportunity here. Using these new threats, he could establish his reputation in a way that would prevent any future rebellions. The problem was, Amenhotep's advisors wanted to negotiate. "Send diplomats," they urged. "Offer them better trade terms. Your father would have—" But Amenhotep cut them off. "My father is dead," he said, "and I am not my father." Instead of diplomacy, Amenhotep did something unprecedented. He announced he would personally lead the smallest force possible, just 10,000 elite troops, against the combined armies of 7 kingdoms. His generals thought he'd gone mad. The enemy had over 50,000 soldiers. But here's the crucial part. Amenhotep wasn't planning a traditional battle. He was planning a hunt. Using intelligence from Egyptian spies, Amenhotep learned that the 7 princes would meet at a fortress in Shamash-Edom to finalize their alliance. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed Egypt would take months to mobilize a response. Amenhotep's army covered 200 miles in just 5 days, a speed that shouldn't have been possible. How did they do it? Amenhotep had invented a new marching formation where troops rotated positions every hour, allowing some to rest while others pushed forward. The army never stopped moving. When they reached Shamash-Edom at dawn, the princes were still asleep. What happened next wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Amenhotep personally led a chariot charge straight through the fortress gates. His inscription describes how he shot arrows through 2 princes while they were still in their beds. Another tried to escape on horseback, but Amenhotep ran him down, dragging him behind his chariot while still alive. The remaining 4 princes surrendered, thinking they'd be ransomed as was customary. They had no idea what Amenhotep had planned for them. But here's where the story gets truly dark. What most people didn't realize was that Amenhotep wasn't just crushing a rebellion. He was conducting a psychological warfare experiment that would reshape how Egypt controlled its empire. Those 7 captured princes? They were just the beginning. You see, Amenhotep had studied the problem of rebellion deeply. Previous pharaohs would defeat rebels, take some tribute, maybe execute the leaders, and leave. But the rebellions always came back, just with new leaders. Amenhotep realized the issue wasn't military. It was psychological. People rebelled because they thought they could win, or at least survive if they lost. He needed to make rebellion literally unthinkable. So he created what historians now call the Theater of Terror. After capturing those 7 princes, Amenhotep didn't just execute them. He turned their deaths into a months-long spectacle that would be seared into the collective memory of every potential rebel first. He had them paraded through every major city between Syria and Thebes, a journey of over 800 miles. At each stop, they were displayed in cages like animals, while Amenhotep personally described their crimes and their coming fate. But here's the truly genius part. He made their own people watch. Amenhotep would round up hundreds of Syrian and Nubian prisoners and force them to witness their leader's humiliation. Then came the hunting grounds. This is where Amenhotep II earned his reputation as the most terrifying pharaoh you've never heard of. He created special walled compounds near Memphis, each one several acres large, where he would release prisoners and hunt them for sport. But these weren't random prisoners. They were specifically chosen. Minor nobles who had supported the rebellion. Military commanders who had fought against Egypt Amenhotep would invite Egyptian nobles to watch from viewing platforms as he stalked these men with his bow. His inscriptions proudly record that he once killed 7 rebel commanders in a single afternoon, each with a single arrow to the heart. The bodies would then be displayed on the palace walls, with signs describing their crimes. The message was clear. Opposing Egypt wasn't just death. It was becoming entertainment for your conquerors. At the height of his power, around 1420 BC, Amenhotep controlled an empire generating wealth equivalent to billions in today's economy. Tribute flowed in from terrified vassals who would rather bankrupt themselves than risk his attention. One inscription records the annual tribute from just the Levant region: 88 chariots, 730 pounds of gold, 14,000 pounds of copper, 500 weapons, 240 horses, and 45,000 cattle. That's from one region, delivered every year. But Amenhotep now had 88,000 slaves. And this is very different to normal people. These weren't workers. They were living symbols of his power. He would have hundreds of them execute massive construction projects in impossibly short time frames, working them to death to prove that Egyptian power could reshape the very earth itself. When visiting dignitaries came to Memphis, Amenhotep would stage elaborate hunts where he'd personally kill lions, elephants, and yes, human rebels, all in a single day. One Syrian ambassador wrote, "The Pharaoh is not a man. He is death itself wearing a crown." The problem was, Amenhotep had created a system that required constant escalation. Fear is like a drug. People build tolerance to it. After a few years, public executions weren't enough. Simple hunting wasn't enough. Amenhotep had to keep inventing new horrors to maintain the terror that kept his empire stable. But the theater of terror didn't stop there. By year 12 of his reign, something disturbing was happening. Amenhotep was starting to enjoy it. Not just the power, but the actual killing. His inscriptions become increasingly detailed about the deaths he personally caused. He describes the sound of arrows piercing flesh, the way bodies convulse when dying, the expressions on faces when people realize they're about to die. Little did Amenhotep know, his own system was beginning to work against him. You see, when you rule through pure terror, you create a kingdom of the terrified, and terrified people don't make good soldiers, administrators, or even workers. Egypt's military campaigns were becoming increasingly brutal, but decreasingly effective. Soldiers were so scared of failing Amenhotep that they would lie about victories, inflate enemy casualty numbers, and hide their own losses. One papyrus fragment from this period, discovered in the 1920s, contains a letter from an Egyptian commander to his subordinate. "Tell the Pharaoh we killed 3,000, he'll never know we only killed 300. Better he believes we won greatly than learn we struggled." This culture of fear was rotting Egypt from the inside. But before we get to the collapse, you need to understand just how far Amenhotep's brutality went. In his 9th regnal year, a minor Nubian chief named Akaki refused to pay tribute. The response was so extreme that even hardened Egyptian generals were disturbed. Amenhotep didn't just attack Akaki city. He systematically destroyed every well, every farm, and every food store for 50 miles around it. Then he surrounded the city and waited. For 3 months, he let starvation do his work for him. When the city finally surrendered, only about 2,000 of the original 10,000 inhabitants were still alive. Amenhotep had them all branded on the face and sold into slavery, except for Akaki and his family. Them he saved for something special. Then in 1401 BC, something happened that changed everything. For all his brutality, for all his strength, Amenhotep couldn't conquer one enemy, time. He was now in his late 40s, and years of combat had taken their toll. His legendary strength was fading. That bow that only he could draw, he could barely pull it halfway. More dangerously, people were starting to notice. During a public ceremony in Thebes, Amenhotep attempted his famous feat of shooting an arrow through copper targets. The arrow bounced off. The crowd gasped. For the first time in his reign, Amenhotep looked mortal. He had the witnesses executed later, but you can't execute a moment word spread like wildfire through the empire. The God King was becoming just a king. For Amenhotep, as these signs of weakness started to come out, the very foundation of his rule began cracking. Remember, his entire system was based on being the ultimate predator. But what happens when the predator becomes prey? Sensing weakness, the Mitanni kingdom in the north began raiding Egyptian territories. Amenhotep led a campaign to crush them, but something unprecedented happened. He didn't win. Oh, Egyptian records claim victory, but archaeological evidence tells a different story. Egyptian fortresses in Syria were abandoned. Tribute payments stopped. For the first time in his reign, Amenhotep retreated. Back in Memphis, Amenhotep became increasingly paranoid. He saw conspiracies everywhere. He had his own son, Prince Webensenu, watched constantly, convinced the boy was plotting against him. He executed 2 of his most loyal generals based on dreams he'd had where they betrayed him. The man who had hunted others was now being hunted by shadows of his own creation. Palace inscriptions from this period show a dramatic change in tone. Gone are the proud descriptions of hunts and victories. Instead, we find religious texts, prayers to Amun-Ra for protection, desperate attempts to secure divine favor. As for Amenhotep, he died in 1397 BC, under circumstances that remain mysterious. Official records claim he died peacefully in his sleep, but his mummy tells a different story. There are signs of trauma to the skull that suggest a violent death, possibly assassination. His son, Thutmose IV, succeeded him, and immediately reversed many of his father's policies, suggesting the royal court had had enough of the theater of terror. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were the common Egyptians and vassals who lived under Amenhotep's reign of terror. Conservative estimates suggest over 200,000 people died as direct results of his campaigns and executions. That's not counting those who died from the famines and economic collapses his brutal policies caused. What is clear is this pharaoh was an example of how absolute power, combined with childhood trauma, can create a monster. Amenhotep wasn't born evil. He was systematically trained to be brutal, then given unlimited power to express that brutality. Reports suggest that towards the end, Amenhotep had gone from being a powerful warrior king to a paranoid, sadistic shadow of himself. He went from hunting enemies of Egypt to hunting anyone who looked at him wrong. The boy who killed his first victim at 12 died having killed thousands, maybe tens of thousands, many with his own hands. But here's what's really interesting, though. Amenhotep's reign actually worked, at least in the short term. Egypt remained the dominant superpower for another generation, largely because potential enemies were still too terrified to challenge Egyptian power even after Amenhotep was gone. His reputation as the Butcher Pharaoh lasted for centuries. Nubian texts from 200 years later still reference him as a warning. Do not anger Egypt, lest another Amenhotep arise. Modern military historians study Amenhotep II as an example of how psychological warfare can be more effective than conventional warfare, but also how it ultimately destroys the user as much as the enemy. You create a kingdom built on fear. You get a kingdom that can only function through fear. Remove that fear, even for a moment, and everything collapses. It's a lesson that many rulers throughout history have failed to learn. From Stalin to Pol Pot. Those who rule through terror eventually become victims of their own system. Now, whilst the story of Amenhotep II is pretty terrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most psychologically twisted ruler in ancient history. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.